Hi, I'm Scott LaMorte from Itasca Bank and Trust Company, your local bank with big shoulders. Together, we've been shaping the future since 1948, but we're just getting started. We take pride that businesses and individuals like you know us for our high level of customer service, financial strength, and up-to-date technology. What we really want to be known for is our connection to the community. Itasca Bank and Trust Company may have a big bank ability, but we know what matters most: people. Join us as we invite members of the community to the table and have conversations as neighbors. Hi, I'm Scott LaMorte. Welcome to the Itasca Bank and Trust Company's Insights podcast. Through this podcast, we hope to give you insights into the work we do with our customers and with the communities we serve as we strive to become Chicagoland's best community bank. My guests for today are John Binneboese, Senior Vice President of the bank, and Diane Middlebrooks, the Women's Initiative Coordinator at the bank. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Scott.
Yes.
So let me talk a little bit about your backgrounds before we get too deep into what's going on at the bank. So, John, your experience with the bank goes back quite a ways, huh?
Yes, it does. I've been at the bank now. This year is 45 years.
Wow.
So it's
And
been a while.
And how did that start?
I was born where I was born and all that stuff.
Well,
you want me to go that far back?
Well, we go back as far as you like, John.
All right.
How did we land at the bank?
I was at the time working at a bank in Elmhurst, York State Bank and Trust Company. I started working there because the president of the bank that I got to know at the job I was at during my years in high school offered me that opportunity once I got out of college. Never imagined doing that. And I said, sure. So I started working at York State Bank and Trust Company, and I was there for 2 years until I think it was my father that said enough of that. But I was interviewed to come work for Itasca Bank and Trust Company, and my father was at Itasca Bank and Trust Company at the time, and so they hired me.
And you're a native Itascan? Born and raised?
Born and raised in Itasca.
Never left?
I've lived there my whole life, other than the times that I was away at schools. But I've moved from the north side of town to the south side of town.
All the way over from
So
one
it's
side to the other,
it's
huh?
a big deal, yeah.
Oh, boy.
My wife is from Itasca. So it's
And you raised your family in Itasca?
raised our family in Itasca also. I lived for a very short time in Bensonville for a couple of years. My wife and I in Bensonville bought a house that was affordable to us at the time.
I was going to ask you if it was a witness protection program.
It was kind of that. But our children went to school in Itasca, and I belonged to Lutheran Church and School of St. Luke, and so we wanted our children to go to the school there. And so we kept driving them. Julie kept driving them, my wife, back and forth, and finally we said, we've got to move to Itasca.
So how did your upbringing affect your decision to get into banking? Was it something you always wanted to do, or was it something you somewhere along the way had an aha moment?
I went to school. I went to the university to be to work in the forestry department, to be a forest ranger. I love the out of doors. I love the out of doors.
That's the Eagle Scout in him, Diane.
Yes. Yes.
So that makes perfect
Maybe
sense.
I'm an Eagle Scout because I love the out of. I don't know what it is.
So you wanted to be a forest ranger, but instead you landed in a bank.
And I landed in a bank. I don't have the reason why, other than the fact that I was working during college at a swimming pool, and the president of York State Bank and Trust Company came to that swimming pool often, and we talked quite often. I talked to a lot of people quite often there, and so I went back there after my senior year of college to work one more summer. I had been approved to go to a law school, But there was an error, and so I couldn't get into the school until the winter semester, because it was full, and so I would have to wait until the winter semester. And this fella said, "Why don't you come and work for us?" And I loved banking. I was a teller, and I loved being a teller, and I loved all the things that I've done in the bank, but it just was something I liked, so I never went to law school.
You know what they say, things happen for a reason, right?
Things happen for a reason.
So what's Diane's story?
So I was raised in Chicago, lived there.
Okay, that's a big place.
That's a big place on the northwest side.
Okay.
And I was a Girl Scout, and so to get a badge, we had a tin can, and we fried an egg on it on a cement sidewalk. That was my exposure to kind of the camping world.
Right.
Yeah.
Urban jungle, right?
Right, exactly. So I went to University of Illinois in Chicago, and then when I graduated, I taught school in a 7th grade grade school in Chicago. And so I did that for 10 years. And then after those 10 years, I took a job with a software and a manufacturing company. And I was hired to train customers that were all over the U.S. About how to use their new software product. And again, I had never been on a plane. And I wound up flying all over the U.S., getting stranded in airports and so on. But anyway, so the department grew, and I was managing 30 employees or whatever. And then I was recruited by a asset management company that did network services and business continuity. So again, I managed the people that gave support to our customers. And then after that, I decided to open my own business, and it was a coaching and company that I worked with business owners, presidents of companies, and employees. So I joined NABO, Chicago National Association of Women Business Owners in Chicago, which I recommend to any woman business owner. And then I had the opportunity to be on their board of directors, and then I was president of the chapter for 1 year. It's a great organization. And then one day I was sitting in my home office, and I got a phone call from John, and he said he and Jack Menching, the president of the bank, would like to talk to me about something, and so I said yes, and then the first thing that I thought of when I hung up the phone is, where in the world is Itasca? So I did find it. I did find Itasca, and then the rest is history.
Got to go all the way to the other side of the airport, right?
Yeah.
So as all this is going on, so you two really met each other somewhere in the late 90s probably, or somewhere in that time frame?
About
roughly?
2000.
Close to 2000?
Second floor of a Italian restaurant in Old Town Bloomingdale.
Sounds lovely.
Yeah.
So we're here today to talk about the history and the future of the bank's Women's Initiative. And officially we say that the Women's Initiative started in 2000, but John, you were part of the precursor to that, correct? Mm-hmm. So if my notes are correct, we had a seminar at the bank in 1992, the first one aimed for a women audience, called Financial Planning for Women Making Quality Choices. And is that seminar style of education the precursor to what is now the Women's Initiative? As best you remember?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. We began to notice Itasca Bank and Trust Company is not solely, but in large part, working with small businesses.
Sure.
And at that time, in the 90s, women began to have a greater impact on car buying. Women began to have a greater impact on colors
Everything.
in the house, everything, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of looked at one another, Jack and I, and says, maybe we ought to do some programs for women, because we noticed that as the gentlemen who started these small businesses, and I say that because they're men that came back from the war.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so these men had these businesses going, and they were beginning to turn these businesses over to their daughters to help run them. They began to teach them how to run them because they were getting older. And so we decided to start to have some seminars for these women who were beginning to run these businesses. And that was in the early 90s.
So that
So we-
starts in the 90s. Well, that's fairly groundbreaking. That was not a commonplace. It's not like every bank was out doing the same thing.
We
back
don't
then, right?
think so.
Not that I'm aware of.
We did seminars on financial planning, on investing, on overall financial awareness type stuff.
Yeah.
Pretty general.
Yeah, there were three, you told me, that were in the 90s, three different ones, and they were often presented by women, to women, and
Sure.
women were invited, and that was a draw too.
Yeah.
Because the women felt comfortable asking questions, because they were all women.
Sure, makes for a comfortable environment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as the 90s are closing down, somewhere along the way, the bank makes a pretty significant investment into this type of programming, right, John? Is that
The early 2000s,
okay?
and oddly enough, it was Jack and I, two men, that thought, why don't we start up a women's program? Instead of having women help us, it was two guys that started this up. And so Jack and I began to work on how we can put this program together. At the time, we were working with a consultant, and we began to ask him some questions about it, and we came up with the name Women's Initiative.
And that kind of programming comes with a cost, so the bank had to commit some
Our
significant
initial
funding to that,
our
right?
initial commitment was, very
Yes.
substantial.
And you say very substantial. It's in the history book.
$250,000.
Yeah.
$250,000 commitment in 1999, 2000.
No, early
thereabouts.
200s,
Oh, okay.
early
Yeah,
2000s.
yeah.
I mean, that's a
Yeah.
lot of money. That's a lot of money now, but that was
Right.
even more so back then,
Exactly.
right? So that brings us to the point where Diane kind of enters the fray, right?
Yes, so the first thing was to do the roundtables for Women's Initiative. Because when, as he said, Jack noticed that their big commercial customers were turning over their daughters, not just their son, and he felt that they might need to learn more and so on about managing businesses and whatever, and that's what the roundtable started then.
We did a little bit of this on our own, using a lady that worked at the bank. And we began to feel that this program needed to do more. It needed to grow, more so than what we wanted to dedicate one of our own employees to.
Sure.
We wanted someone who would be a Women's Initiative coordinator. And so this consultant we were working with at the time told us about Diane. And that's when I called Diane, and that's when we met for lunch.
So Diane,
And crazy enough, she said yes.
what's your recollection of your first meeting with John?
I enjoyed talking with him, and I loved the concept. And and when you're saying that two men, started this, well, but they had daughters. They're good people. I say to this day when I talk about the bank, they're such good people. And so it doesn't surprise me that they would want to do a really good job for Women's Initiative for women. And so, I was sold at the beginning and from then on.
And you mentioned roundtables, Diane, and I know that's kind
Right.
of a core component to the program.
Right.
Can you tell everyone a little bit about what a typical roundtable experience is like in the Women's Initiative?
Yeah, we have two different roundtables, and they're from women with non-competing businesses. So we always start at the beginning with asking them, what do you want to bring to the group? So if they're having a challenge or a new idea, they want to get feedback from the rest of the group. And then, often I have something interesting new in business that I share too, and we have a good discussion. So women can feel safe in this room telling each other anything. They never talk about it outside that group. And they can, if they're having a hard time, sometimes there's tears in the room, or if they're happy about something, they celebrate each other. So it's a very supportive group for every woman in those roundtables.
My office is next to one of the rooms that
Yeah.
they have the round table. I can attest to that.
I've
You
heard
can
some
hear the
laughter
laughing.
myself.
Right,
Yep.
It can get
exactly.
pretty-
Right, yeah,
The
they're
women's-
wonderful.
Yeah, the Women's Initiative as a whole is we wanted it to be somewhat holistic.
Yes, right,
Sure.
right.
We wanted the program to focus on not only the business side of what they're doing, because that was very important. I mean, they're trying to run their business.
Of course.
But also the personal side of it, the health side of it, that's very important, and the fitness side of it.
And at that point in the bank's evolution, the bank had some connectivity to the health and wellness community. There was some
Yes.
relationships with the area hospitals and doctors and
That
things
we
like
had
that.
speakers, that on health, and then some that were just interesting, because women like to learn new things. And so we had various programs on these different things that were inspiring, or they could learn things from, and it just grew.
And I laugh because John told me recently that one of the speakers he remembered was a doctor named Marianne Malloy, who was a cardiologist, I think on
At
Channel
Elmer's.
5,
Elmer's,
out of
yeah.
Elmer's Hospital, and she was always on weekends on Channel 5, right?
Yeah.
And I knew her. She was on the board of trustees at Elmer's College, my alma mater, so I knew Dr. Malloy. So it was kind of neat to see that local connectivity, but I think it speaks to the bank's ability to sort of get in the community and use those connections and bring them back to help other people, and I think that's fantastic. So,
We had Terry Savage,
Right.
sure.
who was nationally renowned syndicated,
Of course.
on financial issues. We had Seattle Sutton.
Right.
We had
Kathy
Diane.
and Judy.
Yeah.
I was going to
Kathy and
ask you about the
Burns
Kathy
from
and
Channel
Judy.
7. We were,
How did that happen?
I don't remember.
that was pre-Diane,
Yeah,
right? I
right.
think
It
it
was
was.
2004.
Yeah.
Kathy and Judy was in 2004. That's Kathy
We-
O'Malley and Judy Markey from
we were-
WGN.
We were beginning to grow the Women's Initiative.
Mhm.
It was starting to take off. And again, crazy guys, we decided we need a shot in the arm. So we decided to
That would get some publicity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
invite
Splash.
Kathy and Judy to be one of the speakers at what's the big
Forum, we call it the forum.
The Women's Initiative Forum,
We have
Initiative Forum, sure.
every year,
Yeah.
yeah.
which is where it's a large room where hundreds of the women would come and listen to the speakers we had. And so Kathy and Judy agreed to do it. At the time, they were on WGN radio
Right.
in the late mornings.
And they were white hot. They were big in
Yeah.
Chicago. I
At the
remember
time-
that vividly.
At
right?
the time, they were
Yeah.
very big.
So that's an amazing. I mean, some of the other
And
names
that-
that I saw just blew me away too. Though I mean, it wasn't like you only had one or two of those. Like, you mentioned Seattle Sutton, Connie Payton.
Yes.
I
Yes.
saw Bonnie Blair, the
Right.
Olympian.
Judy Bartopinka,
Judy
who was
Bartopinka.
at the time
Exactly.
the treasurer of
Treasurer.
the state of Illinois.
Well, and Allison Levine, who was the captain of the first women team to scale Mount Everest, and the photos she
Oh, I can only imagine.
showed were just
Yeah.
breathtaking.
I mean, we've had great people.
yeah,
Bonnie Blair,
exactly.
you know, I mean, just, we've
That's-
had
I mean, there's-
interesting people.
Those are some
come and
really
talk.
inspiring
Right.
names.
And the women loved it.
Yeah,
And that's what's
absolutely.
important,
You know,
right?
Right.
And they got a lot out of it. Because as those women would come and talk, they would be inspiring.
Right.
And they would inspire all the women who would come and in whatever way that they were, you know, speaking. And it was great.
So Diane, how has the Women's Initiative changed, or maybe not changed necessarily, over the course of the time you've been around it? Because you've seen some things happen. You know, we've seen recessions and pandemics and all kinds of stuff. So what's different and what's the same?
So ininitially, when the first few years of the Women's Initiative, the women that joined were basically in Itasca or Roselle or surrounding suburbs there. But now we have Women's Initiative members in 350 cities and towns all throughout Illinois.
Wow.
So that's a big spread now of women from all over. You know, and so our core values in the Women's Initiative stay the same, but women's interests change over time, so we adapt to that to keep being relevant for topics and so on. And then talking about you know, Itasca Bank being a community bank, we always see it. The Women's Initiative is a community of women.
Sure.
And they get to know each other, and sometimes they don't know each other, but they love to be in a room with women talking before the program starts. They can share ideas or whatever, so it's that's what's been great about it.
We never do a hard sell.
No.
That's not, this has never been designed
So let's back that up
to
a
be
second.
a hard sell to Itasca
Right.
Bank and Trust
Do
Company.
you need to be a customer to be a part of the Women's
No.
You do
Initiative?
not need to be a customer.
Yeah, and they made that a specific thing right from the beginning, because again, our customers are our best salespeople
Of course.
for each other. An interesting story was one of the bankers told me that a woman came in and brought a lot of money into the bank, and she became a new customer. And they always ask, well, where did you hear about Itasca Bank? And she said a couple of years before, she was in a shopping mall, and she was, you know, having a hard time. She was going through a divorce or something. And then she broke down in tears. And she said a woman came up to her and asked her what was wrong. And she said, oh, I'm just so down and everything. And she said, you need to go to Itasca Bank because Itasca Bank understands women.
Wow.
Could you believe that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're right. You can't.
That's
yeah.
just
You
is
can't
an
get that
amazing
any other
story.
way.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
It
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's the breadth of the spread of what we have.
I was gonna say, I feel like that story really captures the essence of what this is all about, right? It's not about dollars and cents. It's about, you know,
No.
You
your
connect
whole
with
self,
yeah,
and
you
being part of a
connect to them.
community.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think is great. And I applaud that the bank's vision was to not focus on one particular thing, but rather to be, they used the word holistic
Yes,
earlier,
a-
but, you know,
absolutely.
head, heart, and all of that goes together. Because, you know, if one part of you isn't functioning right, then the whole of you can't function right, correct?
Yes.
That's the way I see it, so.
Yeah,
We had to be welcoming.
right.
It would never work if Itasca Bank wasn't welcoming to these women and their needs. And their needs are across the board. And Diane is fabulous in addressing that. She connects with them so well, and they're able to talk to her or because of her conversations, they're free to talk to other women
Mm-hmm.
to be able to
Sure.
to be able to get the confidence of coming in and talking to somebody at Itasca Bank and Trust Company and not feel threatened. And that was huge. And that is huge to them. You know, we don't want that.
Yeah. So we have women in age ranges from 20s to their 90s.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's a
big
spread.
span.
Yeah, exactly. And so they have different interests and whatever. But again, in these programs, they talk with each other and share ideas and so on. And again, that's what. And I keep thinking and saying, the Women's Initiative is a community of women because Itasca Bank is a community bank.
Sure. So, Diane, this can't be all Linford wine and roses. You like that plug, John?
Nice.
So it couldn't have been that easy all along. Was there any difficulty during, like, pandemic times? Did you make any adjustments?
Yes, we had to. Yeah, the first day of the pandemic arrived in the U.S. and it was in March. I had scheduled a program and 200 women were coming, so I had to cancel it.
Yikes.
And so then we had to figure out what to do, and so we started to do virtual meetings on Zoom. And some women adapted to it, and some didn't. But then during that time, just to keep connected with the Women's Initiative members, I sent a series of emails to them that had some kind of inspirational things, or I asked some of our favorite speakers what they want to tell people, tell the Women's Initiative members what they're thinking about. And one of my favorites was Leslie Goddard, who's a wonderful.
I was going to ask you about your Leslie Goddard.
Yeah, right. She's a wonderful actress, presenter, and so she had. She said, and she had done a program on Amelia Earhart. So she said something like, "Think about being Amelia Earhart and just soar," you know. And it was a very wonderful quote in that email. For women that needed some encouragement. Sure. and so on. Yeah.
And aren't we all happy we're out of those days now and we're back to doing things the traditional way?
Yes.
Right?
The women are really happy that's over with, because the biggest thing that people come to is the ice cream social.
Yes.
Tell me about the ice cream
All right.
social.
The
here.
ice cream social.
All right. So for some reason I started this in, I don't know what year it was, and so first when I announced it, some of the women said, so what is an ice cream social? And I said, well, you eat ice cream and we have fun. So that's all they needed to know. So we have ice cream that they can make their sundaes and so on, and have a presentation. Now, during the pandemic, we couldn't do that in person. So Eileen, that works with me on the Women's Initiative, had a great idea, because there is a ice cream place in Roselle, and she said, why not tell the women, because we were going to have a video by Leslie Goddard on our website, and they could watch the program, but before that they could go to this ice cream store and get a little cup of ice cream, and we would pay for it. And and so that's what we did. And so the women loved it, but they also were happy to say that it was helping a small business.
I love the community connection
right,
to it.
Exactly.
Supporting a small local business.
She's never had that many people ask for ice cream. And
well,
now she's doing very well because of that.
Well, it was actually, and he was a wonderful man. He just started the business like an year before, and so he was so grateful that we did that. And so, it's again about being community. Yeah.
Right. I love it. So, what do you see moving forward, Diane? What do you see in the future of Women's Initiative? And John, the same question for you. So don't. I'm not only asking Diane here.
Yeah. Okay. So we are going to keep going and listening to women and what they need. You know, it'll change because what women need now is different or want to know about. So for example, our latest program that's going to be next week is Rediscover You, and it touched a nerve with the women, and within a few days we had 100 registrations. So we have to just keep on thinking about what do they need right now. And our community of women are made up of moms, students, employed women, retired women, and business owners. So that's our constituency. So I have to keep in mind what would all those women enjoy together and or in specific groups.
Do either of you see down the road, this program's 23 years old, and it's almost old enough, it probably is old enough to where you're going to start to probably see multi-generational members.
Oh, yeah.
So do you have that already? Is that already a thing?
Yeah, right.
And I can't imagine that would stop.
No.
So that reminds me, we were talking earlier, I wanted to ask about the program Inspiring Women, Inspiring Girls.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
So I asked women to nominate other women that inspired them. And also, we asked them to nominate inspiring girls. And they nominated different women, and then we had at our program, the big program, we honored those women. And so they, came up one by one and said a few words, and it was especially wonderful when the young girls came up, and because they were being honored. It was a special evening. And then in one of the pandemic years, we did it virtually.
Wow.
So and so that was a video, and So again, we want to encourage young girls, inspire in girls, and so that was one of my favorites.
The program has a different appeal to different people for different reasons,
Right.
And that's what's interesting about it.
And the best programs always do.
Yeah.
Right? They hit everybody uniquely.
Yeah,
That's
right.
amazing.
Right.
So, John, I'm going to ask you
Go-
as we're starting to wrap up. In your 45-year career at the bank and the 23 years you've been around this program, are you happy with the way the program turned out?
So much so. Yeah. Yeah. As we began to develop it, we had ideas of what we had hoped. There
Did you ever see this happening?
aspirations of what. No, it has taken on its own life,
Yeah.
and that's
great?
so great. It's Diane has done such a great job. The women themselves in educating Diane have done such a great job. Its outreach is immense. I don't know how many members there are. 3,000? Are there 2,000?
Yeah, there are 3,200.
3,200 women.
Yeah. We lost about 450 during the pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised that number's not higher. Unfortunately, the byproduct of that pandemic was a lot of
huge,
things
yeah.
stopped and didn't restart.
Yeah,
So it's great that we're
exactly.
still moving along and
Yeah.
that the impact was somewhat minimal. So my last question for you,
But
Diane, is
we're happy.
Right.
Of course.
We're happy it has continued, and we're happy it has continued to evolve.
Mhm.
It's not going to end. I
Sure.
don't think there is an end to this.
Well, let's hope not.
It's going to keep.
Right.
It's going to keep going. It's going to keep evolving, and continually get better.
My last question for you, Diane, is: are you still having fun doing it?
Yes.
'Cause that's what really
I
matters,
love
right?
what I do. And from the beginning, when I first started, I still feel that way.
That's great. That's what really matters to me. Last chance to say anything you want to say to the Women's Initiative audience, to the Itasca Bank and Trust audience, the community at large. The floor is yours. No pressure.
We thank you.
Yeah.
We thank you for being part of our program, first of all. I think that it is something that we have learned from them, how to do things better. We appreciate that. and we hope they keep coming.
And we welcome their ideas.
There you go. So if you want more information about the Women's Initiative, you can go to www.itascabank.com. There's a tab on the homepage that says Women's Initiative.
Right.
Gives you all the program information, Diane's contact information, everything you need to know.
Right.
With that, this has been Itasca Bank and Trust Insight Podcast. Thanks for joining us.